This is an oral history with Pat McCormick, and today's date is January 13th, 2007, and we're meeting at the Garden of St. Elizabeth. Is that the correct way to say it?
Gardens at St.
At
Elizabeth.
St. Elizabeth, which is where Pat works. And we're doing this oral history for the Rocky Flats Cold War Museum and the Maria Rogers Oral History Program of the Carnegie Library. And my name is Dorothy Charlo. Thank you so much, Pat.
You're welcome. Thank you for that we could do this.
Yes.
Yeah, good.
And the first question, as I promised, is when and where were you born?
I was born in Harmon, Illinois, which is northwest of Chicago. Born on a farm in October 1935. I am the third oldest of 11 children, and so went to a public grade school and then a Catholic high school, and that's where I met the Sisters of Loretto, the Catholic community that I belong to. So I'm a Sister of Loretto, and we also have co-members in our community of different denominations.
Just going back a little bit, did you know from early on that you wanted to join the...
Well, I think I probably was attracted to the women and the way the women were and the way they cared about their students and cared about education for their students. And I was especially impressed by how personal they were, caring about my family, and also we are an American order, North American, founded in North America in 1812, and so there was something very natural and attractive about the way the women lived their lives and what they taught us a lot. Probably my first education regarding racism was from those sisters. And I remember at times being in conflict with my father because about the black issue, African American, because his experience was certainly one of segregation. He didn't have the opportunity to know any African Americans. And I can remember that conflict with my father.
What were your parents like?
My parents, yeah, farmers. My father, yes, they were farmers. And we had a very, I think, happy childhood. So many of us in one place. We always had playmates. And they were, as I look back on it, my mother and father really gave each of us a lot of confidence, respected with discipline, respected choices that we made, and even if it was a hardship for them, with decisions, career decisions that we would make, they would encourage us to do that. My father was more liberal than my mother, and with time, my mother became a co-member in our community, and then because of the influence of my friends, my father died quite early. He was only 66. And Mom had about 20 years of being a widow, but she didn't sit home. She then did a lot of traveling, came and visited with me for about 20 years before she could no longer travel. And during that time became very familiar with the things that we in our community care about, which is social justice, peace, social justice, a lot of people issues. And so that the way my parents raised us fit in quite well with what I saw in the lives of the sisters.
Yeah. Now, how did you happen to, was it just kind of accident that you happened to go to a school run by these sisters?
No, my mother had gone to that school herself.
Okay. What
But
was
it
the name
was
of the school?
The name of the school was then Community High School in Sterling, Illinois. And my mother, my mom's mom and dad sacrificed for her to go to that school. And so then when it came time, we could not afford for all of us. We had to go by bus because we were in a farming community. So they could only afford to send us to high school. So we went to in fact, my brothers and sisters were just talking about being in a country school where 3 of us were in the same grade, in the same room, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd grade. The next set were 4th, 5th, and 6th, and then 7th and 8th, and then there was a high school. By the time we got to the high school, our parents then decided to send us to a Catholic school. But it was with great sacrifice. My mother, at that time, the priest used to pay people to sing at these masses, and my mother used to leave home. My sister and I were responsible for getting everyone else ready for school, and she would go to these parishes, and that's how they paid for the bus tuition. And so we always knew that my mother and father made great sacrifices for us to have that education. And then my oldest brother went to a Catholic college, and another brother went to a Catholic high school away didn't go to, it's now called Newman High School, but at that time it was community high school. But my mother had the history with the sisters, and so.
And at what point did you go from high school, did you join the community immediately?
Yes, I joined after. I graduated in May of 1953, and I entered the community in September. And so then I went to Kentucky and studied there, and then we were sent to St. Louis, to Webster University, where we got our degree before we went out to teach. And then I went to Fort Collins to teach, and I taught both grade school and middle school there. And then I was asked if I wanted to be, I was about 29 years old, and I was asked if I wanted to be the superior, at that time we still called them superiors, the superior of the community in Fort Collins at St. Joseph Catholic School, or did I want to go to Latin America, to Bolivia? And I said I wanted to go to Bolivia. And so I was trained, I went in 1965, studied Spanish at Loretto Heights College here in Denver, and then went to Cuernavaca, Mexico, and studied there for 4 months. There were 72 of us from every country in the world.
And were they all of the same religious order or different?
Oh, different. Men and women,
Okay.
lay people. And it was run by Ivan Illich. Monsignor Ivan Illich was quite
Can you
a...
spell that?
Ivan, I-V-A-N, I-L-L-I-C-H. And he had a cultural center, intercultural center, and it was there. It was also during the time, I remember while I was there, 3 very important things happened. Pope Paul VI came to the United Nations, and it was at that time that he said, never again war, war never again. So that was 1965. And at that same time, Daniel Berrigan, the Jesuit, and his brother, but Dan especially, at that time, he lived in New York, and Cardinal Spellman, the Catholic cardinal of the New York diocese, banned Dan because he was opposing the Vietnam War, and he got the Jesuits to exile Dan. And while I was in Cuernavaca studying, Dan Berrigan came there, and I talked with him. And Ivan Illich very much wanted Dan to speak with everyone about why he was exiled, and he refused to do that because he said it would only make matters worse. And so then what Dan did was he toured all of Latin America, which was the worst thing they could have done, because then he became more and more, we say concientizado, about the poverty of the world and also U.S. policies at that time. Because Illich was teaching us all about how the United States was really exploiting, what imperialism was doing to the rest of the world, and most especially to Latin America. And so so Vatican II was going on. We in our community, we had Mary Luke Tobin, who was the Mother General at that time.
And who has gone on to become very active locally.
Yes, and she died recently.
Yes.
At age 93. But, so we had that kind of change that was taking place in our lives, in religious life. We religious women and men were being told that we really are for the world. We are there to serve the world and not to internalize and only take care of ourselves. Vietnam War was going on, and we were learning about Latin America. And so I went then to Peru for about 9 months, taught in a boys' school there, and became more adept in the language. And then was asked to be the coordinator, not the superior, but the coordinator in La Paz, Bolivia. And so I did that. And
how would that differentiate? Is that different from being superior?
Well, it's less directive. It's much more communal, and we will meet together. And my task was to go and help the community decide what to do with the school that we had there, because we had been doing team teaching with the Bolivian women, the teachers, and so we were teaching them pedagogy, teaching them how to get away from rote, which many of the Latin American, they have no books, and so the teachers would just read from the book and the children would write it. But there wasn't a thinking process. And so some of the women who came were teaching new math, and they were teaching the teachers new math. And we were teaching, through our religion classes, we were teaching the gospel of Jesus, because it was recognized as a Catholic school, a private Catholic school. But it was for the upper echelon, because of course the indigenous people could not afford to send their children. And so we were teaching, I remember well, teaching classes about the miners, that they were dying at age 38 and that they were indigenous. And I remember well that one of the students was the daughter of a socialist who became very good friends of mine, Marcelo Quiroga Santa Cruz. And he eventually became Minister of Interior, and he eventually nationalized Gulf Oil. And while I was there, and his daughter was in the class, and I knew that she was delighted to know that someone had some of the same views about the indigenous people in Bolivia that her father had. And
so how long were you there?
I was in Bolivia, well, I was there for about 5.5 years in Bolivia, and I was in Peru for about 9 months. So I came back in July of 1971. But while I was there, I was very radicalized, because the U.S., George Bush Sr. was the head of the CIA at the time. Che Guevara was trying to organize so that the country would be their own country. He was trying to do that throughout Latin America. And the young people, there were about 72 of the university students who decided that they would see if they couldn't become leaders of their own country. And so they were in the jungle trying to decide how they were going to do this. And really, because of the intervention of the CIA, they were all killed except 3 of them. And one of them was a friend of mine. And so while I was there, I participated in a hunger strike that the mothers of those 72 conducted. And there was no other North American in the hunger strike at the time. I very much didn't want to be the North American, but I talked with the community and said that in conscience I felt that because we were so responsible that we needed to, someone from North America needed to be part of the support for those women. So I participated in that, and the result of that was that the parents of the school put a lot of pressure on the principal, who was a friend of mine, another sister of Loretto, and so as a result I decided to quit at the school so as not to cause that much difficulty for the continuation of the school. But the parents
were could come under pressure from.
That's right. Well, and I mean, the parents should have recognized that this was not a political act, it was a human act. It was something that was a terrible injustice. And so, as a result of that, I did that in I don't know, it might have been early 1971. And so then by July, and the university students had been saying to me, Pat, the problem is not here, the problem is at home, in the United States. You need to go home. And Dan Berrigan was, because I had stayed in touch with Dan Berrigan all that time. And so Dan kept saying, come back and join the peace movement, come back. And so in 1971 I did come back. I was very radicalized. It was very difficult for me to come back because in the community, I then was on the staff of the community.
And this was
in Denver. I came back to Denver, and so it was very, very difficult because unless you went through that experience, it was very difficult to explain. But we in Latin America, we had some women in Chile, we had some in Peru, and we had some in Bolivia. And all of us were saying what was happening and what the United States was doing undercover. And so many in the community didn't believe us. They just thought, you know, they're kind of out of it. My own mother said to my father, what's wrong with her? She's different. What is it? And I remember my father, I was in the truck with my father one time when I was home visiting, and it was in 1968, before I came back. And he said, you better cool it with your mother. And he didn't do that kind of thing very often because my father was so much more liberal and he understood a lot, you know, and he was very supportive of Cesar Chavez. Because of his health, he had to move to Yuma, Arizona, and Cesar Chavez was doing organizing down there for the United Farm Workers. So when I came back then to Denver, what I then did was I became involved with the United Farm Workers. And that was the first time that I was arrested. And I was on the picket line in Applewood for Gallo wine, against Gallo wine. And so that was my first time to actually be arrested. And so
and
then...
Did you do that on your own as part of the community?
No, I did it as part of... Another sister of Loretto was with me, a very good friend of mine. But we always... So many of us in the community are part of this kind of resistance to U.S. policies that is already going on in the community, in the Denver community or the St. Louis community or wherever. So, for example, when we'll go to the Martin Luther King March on Monday, and many of our friends will join us, and we will carry a big banner that says the Loretto community honors the memory of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And friends will join us. And then many times so we're part of movements that are taking place, and we still are.
And at that time, how was the community, what size was it?
Oh, at that time the community was about 1,200. And we constantly were meeting because the same kind of communal decision-making that was taking place in Bolivia was taking place every place in the United States through Mary Luke Tobin and through her assistants.
I see.
And so the community kept studying, and we were part of National Religious Sisters movements, and we were constantly being asked, fill out questionnaires, we were constantly being educated about Vatican II and about being a part of the modern world. And at that time we changed from habits to regular dress, and people were given a choice in our community to do that because no one was forced to do one or the other. But it was a big time of change, big change. And then we were coming into assembly every year and just looking at all of the ways that we could be of greater service to the world and to our own communities, wherever we lived.
Now, when you said that there were 1,200 of the Sisters of Loretto,
yes.
that was throughout the country? Or?
That's throughout the country.
Right, yes.
Yes.
And so
yes.
the community in Denver was small.
Was smaller. Yeah, might have been 80 of us here at that time, because we no longer had Loretto Heights College. And the other thing we did was we passed a resolution, if you want to say that, call it a resolution, but it's something we have lived by, and that is the individual life of the sister is more important than any institution. And by saying that, that gave everyone the opportunity to choose her own work rather than stay in schools because Catholic priests wanted us to fill this school at very low pay. Now, we didn't care so much about the very low pay, but we did want to make sure that people were choosing the kind of work that they felt most called to. And we had always put a lot of emphasis on people being well educated for whatever they were doing. And so
each individual, as a part of the community, did have the option of doing what she wanted to do.
she did it, but she did it through consultation. I mean, she didn't just go off and make the decision by herself. She did it in communication with according to the principles that we had agreed on, and according to the vows that we had made, and you know, so it was always within the realm of service, mission, poverty, I mean, meaning simplicity of life, and communal discernment. So anyway, how I got out to Rocky Flats. What I did was then, I decided, I had a couple experiences of religious authority overreaching its power and trying to say that it could tell me whether or not I could keep a job according to what I thought, what I believed regarding justice and peace. And so I decided I'm not going to work any place where someone is going to decide my salary on kowtowing. And I decided then to get training in the medical field so that I could still pay the rent, but I wouldn't have, you know, that kind of authoritarian misuse of authority. And so I took training as a nurse aide at Swedish Hospital. And I was doing a lot of resistance at Rocky Flats at that time. So because I had already decided in 1979 that I would go to Seattle, where the Trident, the resistance to the Trident was taking place, with Jim and Shelley Douglas at Ground Zero. And so I went there for 4 months in '79. I went from September to January of '79 to get experience with that kind of resistance. And then I came back to Denver, and at that time decided to live near the Catholic Worker, which is the foundation for much of the resistance from Dorothy Day that has taken place for at least 40 years, had been taking place for 40 years.
Now, just going back just a little bit, can you remember when you first heard about Rocky Flats?
I probably heard about it through American Friends Service Committee. Pam Solo was a member of the Sisters of Loretto at that time. She's now a co-member, but she was at that time, and Judy Danielson, and they were beginning to ask questions about what is this that's taking place out there, and they began doing examination. And so occasionally I would go out to the flats before I went to Seattle. I would go out
with other people?
Well, with the I think it must have been with the prayer group. And that was about, I would say, 7 or 9 denominations at that time. Different ones were coming together. I don't really know who started that. The prayer vigil. It was a Sunday. It was every Sunday afternoon at 2 o'clock. Yes, and we would meet at the Catholic Worker. Well, let me go back for a minute. So when I came back from Seattle, that was when I decided to both join the Catholic Worker community, live near the Catholic Worker community down in 5 Points, and to begin going out to Rocky Flats on a regular basis. So by January of 1980, I was then committed to go out every Sunday afternoon. And our goal was to pray there. And as I indicated when we met, for the Cold War Museum, initially we spent a lot of time, after we would pray, we would spend time talking with the guards and getting to know them. And it was always pretty pleasant, Sometimes it wasn't. I mean, I can remember one time kind of yelling at someone, and it was a great school in learning about nonviolence and learning about our own violence, because I remember well one of the Mennonites walking up to me and talking about how violent that was to do that, to yell at that guard, And so it was always a learning experience to be there, to pay attention to how we felt about the workers, how we felt about those driving in. There wasn't that much traffic, and the gates were closed, of course, because we weren't supposed to go in. But we would be out there on other occasions, and the workers would be going in, or we would have signs, and we'd have to pay attention to how we were relating to the workers. And so for a long time, we had that kind of rapport after the prayer with the guards, and got to know some of them first by name and all of that. Then the more we resisted and the more we were arrested, then the more we ended up in court. And we would tell our side, and the guards would tell their side. And our perception was that the guards at times were lying about what really had happened at the time of the arrest or whatever. And so eventually they were given orders by security to stay at like 200 feet away from us. So then they always had to park and sit in their trucks. They couldn't come over and talk with us,
Now, were the arrests, that was a part of the Sunday prayer
No.
groups, or that was later?
Well, it could be, we did that for 12 years. I was part of that for 12 years. So sometimes, all the time, we were meeting in between this going out on Sundays.
Okay.
We met as a resistance community, prayer and resistance and contemplation community, and talked all the time about what is the best next thing to do. And so at different times people would say, this is what we plan to do. We would pray together about that. The morning, so as you know, there was the large encirclement. Sometimes there were large civil disobedience. Now we call it civil resistance, but then, because we're not really being disobedient, we're being obedient to what we feel we are called to do in conscience and what is good for people. So anyway, there were times when we went as groups, and we would have what we called affinity groups, and that would be there'd be 8 or 10 of you who together would plan what you're going to do when the arrests are going to take place. And then you always had, within that affinity group, there might be 4 people or 5 who plan to be arrested because of what's happening in their lives, because you always have to think about the consequences of being arrested. Then there might be 4 or 5 others who are going to be support persons while you're in jail, or who will be in contact with you, etc. So that kind of action was taking place many times too. So we would go inside the gate, and then we were far away from Rocky Flats, the plant itself. But we were in a place where we were supposed to not be, and then we'd be arrested, and so those kinds of arrests took place. Then you had, like the Patrick Malone and all of what they did on the tracks with the tent.
Now that was in
teepee.
78 and 79.
Mm-hmm. Yes, yeah. But all through that time, from, let's say 77, 78, during all of that time, there were different forms of resistance. And so then, in 1982, Sisters Pat Mahoney and Sister Marie Nord, a Franciscan sister and a sister, Blessed Virgin Mary was her community, they drove into the flats, and they didn't know whether or not they could get in without showing some form of entry, and so they made badges. And so when they were arrested then, they were charged and convicted of a felony for falsification of a document.
So they made something that looked.
That's right.
distance as
That's
well
right.
as a
That's right.
badge.
And
You said
so
that was Pat Mahoney and
Marie Nord,
Marino.
N-O-R-D,
Okay.
Marie Nord.
Mhm.
And so they served time in federal prison for that. So they were in prison when the next year, 1983, Mary Sprunger-Froese, who is a Mennonite woman, she's a member of the Mennonite community, and she lives in Colorado Springs. And I can give you the spelling of her name. She's married to a Canadian, and so her name is Sprunger, and his name is Froese, F-R-O-E-S-E. Sprunger, hers is S-P-R, R-U-N-G-E-R. She's still a member of the resistance community in Colorado Springs. There's a strong community there still. Bill Salzman is a part of that. Everybody in Colorado who knows anything about resistance knows about Bill Salzman. So anyway, Mary and I started planning that we also would drive into Rocky Flats. And so we prayed for a long time. We met. We went to the Catholic Worker Soup Kitchen, where friends of ours, doctors and nurses, came one evening. I invited some Hispanic friends of mine who had children in the military at the time. And they came and they gave blood. And so we gave our own blood. Different people gave blood. And then we carried that blood. We put that blood in a baby bottle, which is kind of a theme that we have in the resistance community nationally, that you carry your own blood in the bottle of the infant, of the one who will be born, and who is being affected by all of these nuclear weapons. And so the whole resistance, of course, is to the triggers that were being sent to Los Alamos to be put into the bomb. And so Mary and I, we also, each of us made a cross, a small cross that was about this long and this wide, and we put pictures of people from all over the world, colored pictures, people all over the world who were being affected by the U.S. policy of manufacturing nuclear weapons. And we carried that cross. And so we met out at the Mennonite church, Arvada Mennonite church, and met with the community and prayed there. And then she and I got in a car that had been given to us, loaned to us, because we never knew if we were going to get automobiles back if we did that kind of thing. And this particular one, we always joke about this, but this particular car would not go in reverse. And so we knew we couldn't make any mistakes. And so we went not to the west desk, but to the east desk. I mean, not desk.
Entrance.
Entrance. We didn't go to the west gate where we usually prayed, but we went straight to the east gate.
From
And-
Indiana.
From Indiana. And we went at the time when people were driving in, when they were going in. We had no badges. We had decided that if they stopped us, we would get out of the car right there, kneel down, and pray and pour our blood on the crosses right there. But in fact, we were just simply waved in. There was no check at all. Now this was only 1 year after those other women went in. And you know, we were always hearing how expensive security was, and we always said, you are wasting your money trying to secure nuclear weapons. The only way to secure them is don't have them exist. And we still say that. The only way to be secure, national security, is based on non-existence of nuclear weapons. And so we drove in, and looked for a place to park and drove up to one of the parking places. There was a fence in front of it, and my recollection is that the Plutonium building, and I don't know if it was 770, but it was not, we could see it. We could see one of the buildings. And there was a security guard over there checking people's identification as they went in. So they would walk through a gate and they would check it, etc. So we got out, knelt down in front of the gate, hung our crosses on the gate, and then poured the blood over the gates, over the crosses, and prayed. And we knelt there, and we knelt, and we knelt, and we just kept waiting. And what we were told later, I mean, what we assumed is that finally some people, some employees getting out of the cars must have noticed and went over. I think maybe the guards must have told us that, because I wouldn't have made that up. So they must have gone and said, call security, there are two women over there kneeling in front of some crosses. And so we knelt there and waited, and the head of security at that time was Sonny Cruz, whom we knew from the encounters at the gate. And he was very upset, very, very upset, because he knew us, and angry that we were there. And so they handcuffed us, put us in a van. Now this was Ash Wednesday, which in the Christian community, that's the beginning of Lent. It's the beginning of time of repentance. That's why we chose that day.
Yes, and what year was it?
It was 1983. And so they handcuffed us, and then they tore the car apart because they were positive that we had a badge in there somewhere, that we had false identification. And we kept saying to them, we didn't have any. We came in without it. And they tore the trunk apart, they opened the hood, they tore the seats, everything. They could not find anything. And so then, while we were sitting in there, Tadolini, and that's his last name, he has since, he's a security guard. Tadlini, I think. Anyway, he came over to the van, and I was sitting on this side. I was sitting near the window, and I said, hi, Tad, because we had talked with him often. I said, hi, Tad, how are you? And he said, what are you doing here? And I said, well, it's Ash Wednesday. He said, oh, I forgot to go to Mass this morning. And I loved that. I thought it was such a wonderful human, you know, and I said, Tad, this can be your Mass. Okay. And so, anyway, we were then taken in and to the Denver County Jail and booked, and then...
Denver County Jail?
Yeah, because in the beginning, Jefferson County used to deal with all of that, and finally there were so many arrests, Jefferson County said, we are not going to, this is a federal offense, and so you've got to figure out. So, yeah, we were taken. That shift had already been made, that's right. So and also, I forgot to mention that when Pat and Marie went in, it was in the newspaper. I remember this so vividly. It was in the newspaper for the first time. They called that a bomb factory. And that was the first, because most of the time people thought that there wasn't anything going on out there related to war. And I remember so well when we first started going, there was this big brick sign in the field that said industrial plant or industrial something. And so I always think it was wonderful that Pat and Marie had the courage to name the truth.
So they called it a bomb factory, and
it was,
and the newspaper, the media
printed it, yes. And so this consciousness was taking place all the time. Every time we went to court, what we tried to do was tell the truth about what was happening there. And the research had been done, you know, and so it was always their word against our word, the federal government, the Defense Department against our word. Now we're doing the very same thing, and that's what the 3 Dominican Catholic sisters have done. They are doing the very same thing by being in court and talking about international law. That the United States is guilty of breaking international law by manufacturing nuclear weapons. And so is every other country that does that. So
you're speaking now of the three sisters that
yes,
recently.
but I'm talking about what we did with Rocky Flats.
Yes.
The peace community, most especially the Plowshares community out of Baltimore, the Berrigans, who for so many years, Liz McAllister, those, for so many years they have been saying in the courts that the judges are co-opted. The judges should be doing what is good for the country and what's good for the world related to nuclear weapons. So anyway, Mary and I decided to not get out on probation, not to pay the bond, and so we stayed in jail for 2 months because it was a misdemeanor in our case.
Because
So
it was a misdemeanor because you
we
had
did not. It was not a felony.
Yes.
We did not have that. So we were at Denver County Jail for 1 month, and then on the beginning of March, Dan Berrigan was coming to Denver, and he was going to give a talk at Loretto Heights College. And I had such hopes that maybe he could come out there to see me, you know, to the Denver County. But just before he came, like 5 days before he came, they moved us. And it's, you know, I haven't been in jail much at all compared to a whole lot of peacemakers. But it is a terrible experience to have them come and get you and not tell you where you're going. And they refuse to do that. And some of the most valiant peacemakers have sometimes spent 2 and 3 months going from one prison to another, and nobody knows where they are. It's a terrible experience. So we were in the van, handcuffed, and they would not tell us where they were taking us. And so we were going north on I-25, and I thought they were going to take us maybe to Wyoming or beyond. They couldn't take us to Wyoming because it had to be Colorado. But anyway, I kept watching and watching, and finally they turned east, and then I watched and watched, and we ended up in Greeley. So then we were in Greeley for another month. So we were in Greeley for Easter, because we got out. It was 2 months. But anyway, a friend brought Dan Berrigan up to Greeley to see me, and it was St. Patrick's Day. And I got to, because he's clergy, it got to be a personal visit rather than through the grate, you know. And so I joked with him and said, here I am all dressed out in orange, you know, on St. Patrick's Day, because we had these things. But it really, it was a very spiritual experience for me to be in jail for that time, because, well, first of all, I had always been fasting. I fasted a lot during that time. In fact, some people yesterday were fasting because of Guantanamo. I fasted on Thursday. Some people did yesterday because it was on the 11th. It was exactly 5 years that they took the first Guantanamo prisoners. So fasting and repentance and forgiveness are always a part of our own experience of nonviolence. And so I had for years and years had only 2 meals. I didn't ever eat a noon meal. And so once I got accustomed to what the jail situation was like, I asked them, because there was never any privacy, and it is 1,000 times worse now. But I asked them if I could skip the middle meal. And then I was locked into a kind of a gathering room, and then I had some quiet time. So that was good. And it just was a very good time to really be in solidarity with some of the prisoners and experience, you know, what women are going through. And it was funny, I was in the Denver jail, I was next to, we slept in a dormitory, and I was next to a Hispanic woman who was in there for a DUI. And she said, my mother feels very confident that I'm sleeping next to a nun. And so you just got to know their stories and some of the hard things, you know, and also the pecking order. I guess I was too naive to think that there would be within the system a pecking order, but of course it's human nature, and there is. And so, anyway, I do remember coming out. I lived right next to the Catholic worker, and I came out, and there was this. I had no idea where they came from. You know, Johnny Jump Ups, the flowers. The base of the entrance into my kitchen door, was filled with them. And I had never had any before. You know, it was just absolutely wonderful. And I remember, because right outside my door, the men and women used to stand in line for the soup kitchen, and so they used to. And I remember feeling such solidarity with them, and how very difficult that is to have to beg your food every day, which I didn't have to do, but it was that vulnerability, because in prison, in jails, you're very vulnerable, very vulnerable. So anyway, then once I was out, I just continued out at Rocky Flats. And during that time, of course, we were also dealing with Central America in El Salvador, and so we were at times also doing actions out at Lowry Air Force Base. And so we were arrested there also. Because I had a very good friend who was in El Salvador during the war, a sister of Loretto. She was a pediatrician and went there to establish a clinic. And so we were really during those Reagan years, you know, and we were doing a lot of resistance. And so we just stayed at Rocky Flats in the prayer vigil until I remember it was in February, I think February 2nd or something like that, that we had our official last vigil. Because even when they said they were going to close it, we kept going until we were sure
So that was
was
for
going to happen.
many years, this closing it until like the late 80s then.
Well, no, let's see, when did they close it?
Well, it was actually 90.
90.
92, yeah.
Yeah, we stopped in February of 92. Yeah, that was our last.
Okay.
We had a regular ceremony
Yeah.
of our last vigil there.
So from 83, when you and Mary went into the plant, through 92,
I continued. Oh yeah, as soon as I got out. Well, and the other thing that I wanted to tell you is that I was then, all the time that I was doing resistance out at Rocky Flats, and I was employed at Swedish Hospital, because I worked on the surgical floor after I had the training. I would tell those women, any Monday that I'm not at work, or any day that I'm not at work, it's because I was arrested. And they gave me full support. Then when I went into, I mentioned this because women were always very supportive of what we were doing, what I was doing. When I was getting ready to do the action in 1983, I talked with my bosses, because then I was doing home care. I was going from home to home. And I talked with my bosses and told them what I was going to do. They held the job. And when I came back, within 4 days, I was back at work. And so there was that sense of solidarity among women during that time of we have to do something, you know. So then...
Just going back a minute, when Sonny Cruz he was the one who arrested you.
Yes, he and the other security officers.
Yeah. You said he was angry. Did you feel he was angry with you, or?
Well, as I look back on it, he was angry that what he was responsible for had been breached.
Yeah.
And then, when they got his statements, we were in jail, and so we had no way to make any statement to the paper. What came out in the paper was that we ran the fence, that we ran the gate.
Oh.
So
That was not
that
accurate.
was not true, no. But, you know, given the amount of money they were spending on security, he wasn't about to say they came in without any, you know, and we had no way to tell our side of the story. But, you know, you just do your best to tell the truth wherever you can, the truth as you experience it, you know. Sonny did, I mean, he drove us he himself, I think, he drove us to the jail, and he did calm down after a bit. You know, it was just that initial terrible frustration, but it's just absolute proof that if people are determined to do something, whatever the motive, they're going to do it. And so don't have something there that is going to be of great danger to everyone, you know. So that's basically, you know, and we now, of course, we just continue all the resistance of nuclear weapons. And so as I say, I have been a very strong supporter of the 3 Dominican sisters over these past 4 years.
Yes.
And it's basically stems from my relationship with Dan Berrigan, because I have such respect for him and his brother Philip, who died and of cancer, and Liz. And
do you still have contact with Dan Berrigan?
yes, I hear from Dan once in a while, and I was in touch with him frequently around the time of Luke Tobin's death, her imminent death, and then her death, and he had lots of respect for Mary Luke, and so we continue, you know, as very best we can. It's been difficult, you know, with the Iraq War.
Leaves,
Oh, well,
yeah.
no, I meant
You meant in the current times.
being a
Yes.
peacemaker these days, a nonviolent peacemaker, is very difficult with this war,
Yes.
because we've been a part of all of the resistance to the war, and as is clear, the president pays attention to no one. And so I thought it was very courageous of the women to do what they did, very, very courageous, at a time when he was determined that people would not counteract anything about weapons of mass destruction.
Yes.
And they were saying, here it is.
Yes.
We have them. And so
They
you're
were
looking for
drawing
them.
attention to
Yes,
our
our
weapons.
own, yeah.
Have you had direct contact with them? Have you visited
Oh, yes.
them?
Well, no, they aren't in prison any longer.
That's right.
Yeah, they served 3 years. One served 2.5 years, and the other served 3.5. And Ardith called me this morning,
Oh,
because they are still working on not in conscience being able to pay the restitution. And so they have been trying to be as creative as possible about how to deal with that. And as you know, they did the food drive recently, and it was rejected. And so they gave the food where they could. But she told me this morning that given what the postage has been that people have spent to send cans of food to the prosecuting attorney, Robert Brown, that they think that they actually had donated about $6,000 worth of food. And then, in addition to the postage, she's saying that it's something closer to 12,000, because people are sending cans of food,
yes.
you know. And the restitution itself is $3,082.
and the restitution, as I understand it, was supposedly because of the cost
That's right.
of repair.
Yes, and they estimated that they actually, because they were very careful how they got into the missile silo, and so they estimated that they probably caused $310 worth. But when the Humvees came, they knocked down everything. And then also the blood cleanup, they exaggerated that. Everything was exaggerated so that they could get it over $1,000, because they couldn't charge them for a felony if it weren't over $1,000. So, anyway, is there anything else that you wanted to
Now,
ask?
just we have just a few more minutes,
Mhm.
but could you just talk a little bit about what you do now?
Yes, I continue in healthcare, and
And are you're not still living at close to the
no,
Catholic
no,
Worker?
no. I mostly because that has become so what we call gentrified. The gentry class has moved in on the poor, and so now I live in North Denver. And as I mentioned to you, I always try to live near where I work because simplicity of life is important to me. And having lived with the Bolivian people, they really have been my gauge all these years. And they were the reason that I fasted every Thursday for a very long time, because I came back to the United States on a Thursday. So anyway, what I do here, I worked in hospitals, in rehab, for after people broke hips or had knee replacements or whatever. I worked with orthopedic doctors and nurses and physical therapists. I'm a physical therapist technician. And so I worked in hospitals until the computer world took over, and I found that I was being told what to do with people by computer rather than by a human being, and I didn't want to do that. So I came here to the Garden of St. Elizabeth, which is owned by St. Anthony Hospital, and I asked if I could create a position of helping people stay healthy. The elderly, help the elderly to do prevention work. And so I do one-on-one work with people. They work on a new step, which is like sitting in a car and you do your arms and the legs at the same time. The treadmill, the therabands, weights, lots of walking. And I find the one-on-one is so crucial because people say to me all the time, if we didn't do this together, I wouldn't do it. And it's people, I have some people in wheelchairs, some people who have MS, some people, who, the great thing about the new step is it has a swivel chair, and so a person in a wheelchair can actually get in. And so it's always been important to me. I mean, I admire people who beg for their living. There are lots of my peacemaker friends who do that. I guess having grown up in a family where you had to pull your own weight, there's some of that that's still there. So I make a living, and then what I do is budget, and then I send to the community what I don't need for paying rent and all of that. And then I'm in communication with community members all the time, and part of small groups. And is it already out?
Not quite.
Okay.
Just in a minute, we only have about 3 minutes left.
Okay.
Do you have any thoughts about what the Rocky Flats, getting into Rocky Flats, what it meant to you, or was it just part of the whole picture of resistance for you?
Well, being in Bolivia changed my life. And so I came back determined to say no to U.S. imperialism. And so Rocky Flats was a way for me to say this is just a terrible waste of human resource, those workers. I mean, Tattellini died of cancer. The two Kelly boys, we were in touch with them for the Teamsters Union. They both, one of them I know died, for sure, Pat and Jim. So the reason we put those pictures on the cross was because we said people in the world are being deprived of resources that are necessary. The poor of the world, this is happening on the backs of the poor of the world. And we have a history of going into countries and stealing resources so that we can have the level of lifestyle that we have, and that's an injustice.
Maybe that's a good place to stop.
Okay, okay, great.